It was a crisp fall afternoon in the heart of a bustling city, the kind of day where the air was tinged with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee from street vendors, and the sidewalks were alive with the rhythm of hurried footsteps. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb in front of a historic, upscale restaurant. The car's engine purred to a stop, and the driver, a sharply dressed man in his mid-30s, stepped out. His tailored suit hugged his athletic frame, and his polished shoes gleamed in the sunlight. He looked around for a moment, taking in the grand facade of the restaurant with an unreadable expression. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with energy. It was a place that prided itself on exclusivity and tradition, catering to the city's elite. The decor spoke of old money, dark mahogany furniture, sparkling chandeliers, and white tablecloths adorned with silver cutlery. The staff moved with a precision born of years of practice, their uniforms crisp and their demeanor refined. The man pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. As he crossed the threshold, the buzz of conversation seemed to pause for just a moment, like the restaurant itself had taken notice of his arrival. He walked with confidence toward the hostess stand, where a young woman in a neatly pressed blazer greeted him with a polite but wary smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone professional. "No," he replied with a calm smile, "but I was hoping to grab a table for lunch." The hostess hesitated, her eyes flicking over him briefly. There was nothing overt in her demeanor, but something unspoken lingered in the air, a subtle tension that anyone attuned to such things would notice. She glanced toward the manager, a tall man with graying hair, who was standing nearby and had been watching the interaction. The manager stepped forward, his posture stiff. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his tone clipped. "We're fully booked today. You'll need a reservation to dine here." The man raised an eyebrow, his smile never wavering. "Fully booked, huh? I see plenty of empty tables." The manager's expression hardened, and his voice grew colder. "Those are reserved for our regular clientele. I'm afraid I can't accommodate you." A quiet tension settled over the room. Other diners had begun to take notice, their conversations dying down as they strained to listen. The man didn't argue or raise his voice. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. From it, he retrieved a small card and handed it to the manager. "Why don't you take a look at this?" he said, his tone still calm, but with an edge of authority. The manager took the card with a frown and glanced at it. His face went pale almost instantly, and his hands trembled ever so slightly as he looked back up at the man. The card bore a name that carried weight in the business world, a name that no one in the industry would dare to overlook. It also bore a title that sent shockwaves through the room. **owner***. The man's smile widened just a fraction as he observed the manager's reaction. "Now," he said, his voice steady, "would you care to reconsider that reservation policy?" The room was utterly silent. All eyes were on the pair, and the weight of the moment hung thick in the air. The hostess looked from the manager to the man, clearly unsure of what to do. The other staff members froze in place, their faces a mix of confusion and unease. The manager opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. He was caught in a moment of realization, one that would upend everything he thought he knew about his place of work. What would happen next was anyone's guess, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary lunch break, and for the man standing in the center of it all, this wasn't just about a meal. It was about making a statement, one that no one in that restaurant would ever forget. The manager's face flushed with a mix of shock and embarrassment as he struggled to form words. His carefully curated facade of authority was crumbling before the staff and diners who were now watching intently. The man standing before him remained calm, his expression unreadable but commanding. He didn't need to raise his voice or push. The silence in the room did all the talking. "Is there a problem?" the man asked, his tone almost gentle, though the undertone carried weight. The manager finally stammered, "And no, of course not, sir. I didn't realize." The man tilted his head slightly, his gaze never breaking. Didn't realize what? He pressed, though his voice was still devoid of anger. The manager hesitated, clearly fumbling for the right words. I wasn't aware of your connection to this establishment, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile returned, faint but deliberate. My connection, he echoed. That's one way to put it. He stepped aside slightly, letting his eyes sweep across the dining room. The other patrons quickly averted their gazes, pretending to be engrossed in their meals, though the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. I believe I'm entitled to a proper introduction, he said, turning his attention back to the manager. After all, as the new owner of this restaurant, I'd like to know who I'm dealing with. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. A murmur rippled through the room as diners exchanged surprised glances. The staff looked at one another, their faces betraying a mix of disbelief and unease. The manager seemed to shrink before their eyes. Of course, sir, he said quickly. I apologize for any misunderstanding. The man studied him for a moment, then glanced at the hostess, who was now frozen in place, clutching her reservation book as if it might anchor her to reality. And you, he said, his voice soft but firm. What's your name? She blinked, startled by the question. Olivia, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Well, Olivia, the man said, his tone warmer now. I appreciate you trying to assist me earlier. You did your job. Thank you. Olivia managed a small nod, her cheeks flushing with relief. The man gestured toward an empty table near the window, one of the best spots in the house. I'll take that one, he said simply. The manager nodded vigorously. Of course, sir, right away. He snapped his fingers at a nearby server, who rushed to set the table. As the man walked toward his chosen seat, the room seemed to exhale all at once. Conversations slowly resumed, though they were hushed and cautious, as if everyone was waiting for the next twist in the unfolding drama. Once seated, the man leaned back in his chair and surveyed the space. His eyes were sharp, taking in every detail, the decor, the placement of the tables, the flow of the staff. He wasn't just a diner. He was an observer, dissecting the very soul of the restaurant. A server approached nervously, holding a menu. Here you are, sir, he said, placing it on the table. The man glanced at the menu but didn't pick it up. Instead, he looked at the server and said, Tell me, what's the most popular dish here? The server hesitated, clearly caught off guard. The pan-seared salmon is very popular, he said finally, and the filet mignon is a house favorite. The man nodded thoughtfully. Good to know. I'll take the salmon, please, and a glass of your best white wine. The server nodded quickly and disappeared into the kitchen, clearly relieved to escape the palpable tension. As the man waited for his meal, his mind wandered. He thought about the path that had brought him here, to this moment. It wasn't an accident that he now owned this restaurant. In fact, it was deeply personal. This wasn't just a business acquisition, it was a statement. The man, whose name was Marcus, had grown up in this very city. As a child, he'd walked past this restaurant countless times, always staring at its grand facade with a mix of awe and longing. Back then, it was a symbol of a world he didn't belong to, a world that felt impenetrable to someone like him. He remembered the first time he'd stepped inside as a teenager, saving up every cent from odd jobs to afford a single meal. The staff had treated him like an outsider, their polite smiles thinly veiling their disdain. It was a moment he'd never forgotten, one that had ignited a quiet determination in him. Over the years, Marcus had built a name for himself in the business world. He was sharp, driven, and unrelenting. When the opportunity to purchase this restaurant arose, he didn't hesitate. It wasn't just about owning a piece of prime real estate. It was about reclaiming a narrative, about transforming a place that had once excluded him into one that he controlled. As Marcus sipped his wine, he noticed Olivia approaching his table cautiously. She stopped a few feet away, clutching a notebook and looking unsure of herself. Sir, she began hesitantly, if you don't mind me asking, why did you choose to buy this restaurant? Marcus smiled faintly, setting his glass down. "That's a good question, Olivia," he said. "Let's just say it holds a lot of history for me." Her brow furrowed slightly, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "History," she repeated. Before Marcus could answer, the server returned with his meal, placing the plate in front of him with a practiced flourish. The smell of the perfectly cooked salmon wafted up, but Marcus barely glanced at it. "I'll explain soon," he said to Olivia, his tone suggesting that there was much more to the story. "For now, let's just see how the food measures up." Olivia nodded, stepping back to let him eat, though it was clear she wasn't the only one either for answers. As Marcus took his first bite, his eyes flicked back toward the kitchen doors. He knew the real work lay ahead, and this was only the beginning. Marcus ate his meal slowly, savoring each bite as though it were more than just food. It was a test, a measure of the standards upheld in a place that now bore his name. The salmon was good, though not exceptional, and Marcus made a mental note to revisit the menu. Quality wasn't just about flavors, it was about an experience, something that lingered with you long after you left. He wanted that for his diners, and right now, he wasn't sure this restaurant was delivering it. As he took another sip of wine, he noticed the subtle shift in the room. Diners were still glancing his way, their whispers barely concealed. The staff moved more stiffly, their usual rhythm disrupted by his presence. Marcus could feel the weight of their curiosity and unease, and he welcomed it. This wasn't a place he intended to inherit quietly. Change was coming, and everyone here could sense it. In the corner, a middle-aged couple murmured to each other, their eyes darting toward Marcus every so often. A young woman sitting alone near the bar stole a quick glance before pretending to focus on her phone. Even the kitchen staff peeked through the small window in the swinging door, their faces a mix of wonder and apprehension. Marcus's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up to see a man in his late 20s, dressed in the same uniform as the other staff members, but with an air of confidence that set him apart. "Good afternoon, sir," the man said, his voice steady. "I'm James, the sous chef. I wanted to personally welcome you to the restaurant and make sure everything is to your satisfaction." Marcus set his fork down and leaned back slightly. "Good to meet you, James," he said. "The meal was fine, but fine isn't what I'm aiming for." James nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, sir. We're always open to feedback." Marcus studied him for a moment, noting the sincerity in his tone. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 4 years, James replied. "I started as a line cook and worked my way up." "Impressive," Marcus said, nodding. "And the head chef?" James hesitated, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "That would be Chef Roland," he said carefully. "He's been with the restaurant for over a decade. He's very set in his ways." Marcus's lips curved into a slight smile. "Set in his ways," he repeated. "That sounds like a diplomatic way of saying he's resistant to change." James didn't respond immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. "Don't worry," Marcus said, his tone reassuring. "I'm not here to dismantle everything, but I am here to raise the bar. Change is inevitable, James. It's how we grow." James nodded slowly, though it was clear he was processing the weight of those words. "I'll let Chef Roland know you'd like to speak with him," he said finally. "Good," Marcus replied. "And James?" "Yes, sir. Keep an open mind," Marcus said, his gaze steady. "You might find that change works in your favor." James gave a small nod before retreating to the kitchen, leaving Marcus alone once more. The minutes ticked by, and Marcus continued to observe the dynamics of the room. He noticed how the servers interacted with the diners, the small hesitations in their movements, the way their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. It wasn't outright dissatisfaction, but it was clear that the staff was operating under an invisible weight, a tension that had nothing to do with his arrival. Marcus's thoughts were interrupted again, this time by the manager, who approached cautiously, his demeanor still rattled from earlier. "Is everything to your liking, sir?" the manager asked, his voice strained with forced politeness. It's acceptable, Marcus said, his tone neutral. But I didn't come here just to eat. I came to understand. The manager blinked, clearly unsure of what Marcus meant. Understand, sir. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression sharp. Tell me about the culture here, he said. How do you treat your staff? Your diners? What's the philosophy that drives this restaurant? The manager hesitated, his face betraying his discomfort. Well, we've always prided ourselves on tradition, he said finally. We cater to an upscale clientele and maintain high standards of service. Tradition, Marcus repeated, his tone thoughtful. And where does innovation fit into that? The manager fumbled for an answer, but Marcus didn't wait for him to find one. Let me save you the trouble, he said. This place has relied on its reputation for too long. You've grown complacent, comfortable. That ends now. The manager's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Marcus leaned back, his gaze unwavering. I'm not here to disrupt for the sake of disruption, he continued. But I won't tolerate mediocrity, and I won't allow this restaurant to rest on its laurels. Everyone here, staff and management alike, will need to rise to the challenge. The manager nodded stiffly, though it was clear he was struggling to process the implications of Marcus's words. As the manager retreated, Marcus turned his attention back to his meal, his mind already racing with plans. You didn't come here to blend in or to maintain the status quo. He came to make this restaurant something extraordinary, a place where anyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from, could walk through the doors and feel like they belonged. But as Marcus took another sip of wine, he couldn't shake the feeling that resistance was brewing. Change, after all, was rarely embraced without a fight. As Marcus finished his meal, the atmosphere in the restaurant felt heavier than before. Conversations remained hushed, and the staff avoided lingering near his table for too long. It wasn't fear exactly, but a palpable unease that hung in the air. He could feel the eyes of the diners on him, their curiosity mingled with uncertainty. Everyone was waiting, wondering what he would do next. In the kitchen, the tension was no less intense. James had relayed the interaction to Chef Roland, whose reaction had been far from warm. The head chef, a stocky man with a fiery temper, was pacing near the stove, muttering under his breath. He thinks he can waltz in here and turn this place upside down. Roland growled, slamming a pan onto the counter. I've been running this kitchen for over a decade. I know what works and what doesn't. James tried to keep his voice calm as he replied, He's the owner now, chef. We have to adapt. Adapt? Roland snapped. To what? His idea of change. What does he know about this place? About our customers? James didn't respond. He'd seen Roland's temper flare up before, but this was different. There was a crack in the usually confident facade of the head chef, a sign that Marcus's presence had already shaken the foundation of the restaurant's hierarchy. Meanwhile, Marcus remained seated, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. His mind was far from idle, though. Every interaction, every glance, every hushed whisper was another piece of the puzzle he was piecing together. This wasn't just about improving the restaurant, it was about unearthing the underlying issues that had been allowed to fester. After a moment, Marcus raised his hand slightly, signaling for Olivia. She approached quickly, her notepad in hand, though her nervousness was still evident. Is there something else I can get for you, sir? She asked. Marcus shook his head. No, but I do have a question for you, he said, his tone gentle but probing. How do you like working here? Olivia blinked, clearly caught off guard. It's fine, sir, she said hesitantly. Just fine. Marcus pressed, his eyes meeting hers. Her gaze darted toward the manager, who was lingering near the edge of the room, watching the exchange intently. I don't want to cause any trouble, she said quietly. You're not causing trouble, Marcus assured her. I just want your honest opinion. Do you feel supported, respected? Olivia hesitated, the conflict evident on her face. Finally, she said, it's not always easy. Some days are better than others. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for being honest," he said. "It matters." Olivia gave a small nod and stepped away, but her words lingered in Marcus's mind. He had suspected there were deeper issues at play, and her response only confirmed it. As he prepared to leave, Marcus signaled for the check, but the manager rushed over instead. "Sir, your meal is on the house today," the manager said, his voice overly eager. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Instead, he stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "Thank you," he said simply. The room seemed to hold its breath as he walked toward the door. He paused just before stepping outside and turned back, his gaze sweeping over the dining area. "This restaurant has potential," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "But potential isn't enough. Change is coming. I suggest everyone prepare for it." With that, he stepped outside, the heavy wooden doors closing behind him. Inside, the restaurant erupted into murmurs. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and the diners leaned in closer, their curiosity spilling over into animated whispers. In the kitchen, Chef Roland slammed another pan onto the counter, his frustration boiling over. "What does he mean by change?" one of the servers whispered to Olivia. "I don't know," she replied, her voice low, "but I have a feeling it's going to be big." As Marcus walked to his car, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "We need to move forward with the plans. I want a meeting with the staff tomorrow morning. All of them." The voice on the other end responded quickly, and Marcus nodded before ending the call. As he slid into the driver's seat, he allowed himself a small smile. This was the turning point, the moment where everything would shift. He could feel it in the air, in the way people reacted to him, in the tension that had taken root within the restaurant's walls. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and he knew there would be resistance, especially from people like Chef Roland. But Marcus had faced challenges before, and he wasn't on to back down. Tomorrow would be the start of something new, something better. And as Marcus drove away, the restaurant behind him felt like a storm cloud ready to break. The following morning, the restaurant staff arrived early, summoned by the unexpected meeting Marcus had scheduled. The dining room, usually prepared for guests, had been rearranged, with chairs pulled into a makeshift circle and the tables pushed aside. It was a strange sight, unsettling for a group accustomed to a rigid routine. The staff exchanged wary glances, whispering to one another as they filed in. Marcus was already there, standing near the head of the circle. He wore a crisp suit, his posture commanding but not overbearing. His presence alone was enough to silence the murmurs as the staff settled into their seats. Even Chef Roland, who rarely joined such meetings, was present, standing off to the side with his arms crossed and a defiant expression on his face. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "Thank you all for coming in early. I won't take too much of your time, but this conversation is necessary." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the room. No one dared to interrupt. "Yesterday, I had the chance to experience this restaurant as a customer," Marcus continued. "I observed the staff, the service, the food, everything that makes this place what it is. And while there's a lot to admire, there's also a lot that needs to change." The tension in the room grew thicker. Chef Roland shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening, but he stayed silent. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his tone softening. "This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about recognizing potential. This restaurant can be exceptional, a place that people talk about long after their meals are over. But to get there, we need to break old habits and embrace new ideas." He gestured toward the group, his eyes steady. "That starts with all of you. Each of you plays a role in shaping the experience here, and each of you has a voice. I want to hear from you. What's working? What's not? What can we do better?" The room was silent at first, the staff exchanging uncertain glances. Finally, Olivia, sitting near the edge of the circle, hesitated before raising her hand slightly. "Go ahead," Marcus encouraged. She cleared her throat, her voice quiet but steady. "Sometimes it feels like Like we're just going through the motions, she admitted. There's no real connection between us as a team. It's like everyone's just trying to get through their shift. Several heads nodded in agreement, though no one else spoke up immediately. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's important feedback, he said. A team that doesn't feel connected can't deliver the kind of experience we're aiming for. Thank you, Olivia. Another voice chimed in, this time from one of the servers. The menu hasn't changed in years, he said. It's good, but it's predictable. Regulars know exactly what to expect, and it doesn't leave much room for excitement. Marcus glanced toward Chef Roland, whose expression darkened further. Anything else? Marcus prompted. A few more staff members spoke up, sharing concerns about outdated procedures, communication breakdowns, and the lack of innovation. Marcus listened intently, his expression never wavering. Finally, Roland stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. With all due respect, I've been running this kitchen successfully for years, he said, his tone sharp. We have a loyal customer base and a reputation to uphold. Change for the sake of change could ruin everything we've built. Marcus met Roland's gaze, unflinching. I appreciate your perspective, Chef, he said evenly. But let me ask you this. When was the last time you pushed yourself to create something new? When was the last time you took a risk in the kitchen? Roland bristled, his pride clearly wounded. We stick to what works because it works, he shot back. And yet, Marcus countered, your staff is telling me otherwise. Complacency might feel safe, but it's a slow path to irrelevance. We're not here to survive, Roland. We're here to thrive. The room was silent again, the tension almost unbearable. Marcus let the words hang for a moment before continuing. I'm not here to strip away what makes this restaurant special, he said. I'm here to elevate it. That means pushing boundaries, taking calculated risks, and listening to the people who make this place run. He turned to the staff, his tone softening once more. This is your chance to shape the future of this restaurant. Your ideas, your creativity, it all matters. But it starts with a willingness to embrace change. Before anyone could respond, the doors to the restaurant swung open, and a woman in a sharp business suit strode in, clipboard in hand. She carried herself with an air of authority, her expression cool and professional. Am I late? She asked, her voice cutting through the room. Marcus smiled faintly. Perfect timing, he said. Everyone, this is Vanessa. She's a consultant specializing in restaurant transformations. She'll be working with us to identify opportunities for growth and improvement. The announcement landed like a bombshell. The staff exchanged stunned glances, and Roland's expression hardened further. Marcus continued, addressing the group as a whole. Vanessa's here to help us, not to replace anyone. But make no mistake, change is coming. It's up to all of us to decide what that change looks like. As Marcus finished speaking, the room seemed to pulse with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The stakes had just been raised, and everyone knew it. The room remained heavy with tension as Marcus finished speaking, his words echoing in the silence. Vanessa scanned the faces of the staff, her expression unreadable, before setting her clipboard down on a nearby table. Let's get started, she said briskly, breaking the silence. We'll begin with individual consultations. I want to hear directly from each of you, your experiences, your concerns, your ideas. The staff hesitated, unsure of what to make of this sudden shift in their routine. Chef Roland, however, didn't bother hiding his displeasure. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath, his voice low but loud enough for Marcus to hear. Ridiculous or not, it's happening, Marcus said firmly, meeting Roland's glare. You can either be part of the solution or continue to be part of the problem. The choice is yours. Roland's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and stormed out of the dining room, the door swinging shut behind him with a sharp thud. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and Marcus sighed quietly. He had expected resistance, especially from Roland, but this was more intense than he'd anticipated. Still, he remained resolute. Vanessa wasted no time, calling Olivia over for the first consultation. The rest of the staff slowly began to relax, curiosity replacing some of their anxiety. One by one, they spoke with Vanessa, sharing their thoughts and suggestions. Meanwhile, Marcus used the time to observe quietly. He could see the spark of hope returning to some of the staff, their initial skepticism beginning to fade. But there was still the matter of Roland, whose absence loomed large over the proceedings. As the consultations wrapped up, Vanessa approached Marcus. "You've got a good team here," she said. "They care about this place, even if they're frustrated. But the head chef, he's a wild card." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's been here a long time," he said. "Change isn't easy for someone like him, but I'm not giving up on him." That evening, Marcus stayed behind after the staff had gone home. He made his way to the kitchen, where he found Roland sitting at the prep table, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You're still here," Marcus said, his voice calm as he stepped into the room. Roland looked up, his expression guarded. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I know you think I'm here to tear everything down," Marcus said finally, "but that's not the case. I respect what you've built, Roland. I just think it can be better." Roland took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze fixed on the glass. "You don't understand what this place means to me," he said. "It's more than a job, it's my life." "And that's exactly why I need you on board," Marcus replied. "This isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about giving you the chance to create something even greater." Roland didn't respond immediately, but Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. "I'm not asking you to change overnight," Marcus continued, "but I am asking you to trust me. Give this a chance." Finally, Roland sighed, setting his glass down. "I'll think about it," he said gruffly. It wasn't a full commitment, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, changes began to take shape. Vanessa worked closely with the staff, implementing new procedures and fostering a sense of collaboration. Marcus focused on creating a new menu alongside Roland, pushing him to experiment and take risks. At first, Roland resisted, but slowly his passion for cooking began to reignite. The final test came when they launched a soft opening for a revamped dining experience. The restaurant was filled with a mix of loyal regulars and new faces, all eager to see what the buzz was about. As the night unfolded, the energy in the room was electric. The staff moved with confidence, the food was met with rave reviews, and for the first time in years, the restaurant felt alive. But the biggest surprise came at the end of the night. As Marcus thanked the team for their hard work, a familiar face walked through the door, Roland's mentor, a renowned chef who had retired years ago. "I heard about the changes," the mentor said, smiling warmly. "I had to see it for myself." Roland's eyes widened in shock, but then a slow smile spread across his face. It was a moment of validation he hadn't expected, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter for both him and the restaurant. As the night came to a close, Marcus stood outside, watching the lights dim. The restaurant was no longer just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, growth, and possibility. And as he turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. In the weeks following the restaurant's soft reopening, the transformation was undeniable. The once muted energy had been replaced with a vibrancy that everyone could feel, from the staff to the diners who walked through the door. Word of mouth spread quickly, drawing in a mix of curious newcomers and longtime regulars eager to experience the changes. Marcus found himself spending more time in the restaurant than he had originally planned, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He thrived on watching the team come into their own, seeing them collaborate in ways they never had before. Olivia, once hesitant and nervous, now moved through her shifts with confidence, her warm demeanor shining as she greeted customers. Even James, who had always been steady but unremarkable in his role, seemed to step up, taking initiative and mentoring newer staff members. Roland, however, was the biggest change of all. Though his initial resistance had been fierce, he'd slowly let his guard down as he realized the new direction wasn't a threat to his legacy, but an extension of it. His creativity in the kitchen began to flourish again, and the new dishes he developed alongside Marcus were quickly becoming customer favorites. One afternoon, Marcus found Roland sitting in the kitchen after the lunch rush, flipping through an old, well-worn recipe book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and sketches, the kind of ideas that had clearly been shelved for far too long. "You've been holding out on us," Marcus said with a smile as he leaned against the counter. Roland chuckled, shaking his head. "I guess I forgot what it felt like to create for the sake of creating," he admitted. "It's good to feel that again." Marcus nodded, his tone thoughtful. "This place is better because of you," he said. "Don't ever doubt that." Roland didn't respond right away, but the gratitude in his expression said more than words ever could. As the weeks turned into months, the restaurant continued to thrive. Vanessa eventually wrapped up her consulting work, but not before leaving the team with a solid foundation and a clear vision for the future. "This is just the beginning," she told Marcus during her final visit. "You've built something special here. Don't let it stagnate." "I won't," Marcus promised. The team celebrated her departure with a small party in the dining room, a reminder of how far they had come as a group. What had once been a workplace marked by tension and division had transformed into a family, united by a shared purpose and a renewed sense of pride. For Marcus, the journey wasn't just about turning around a struggling restaurant. It was about proving to himself and to others that change was possible, even in the face of resistance. He'd faced his share of challenges, from Roland's initial defiance to the skepticism of the staff, but each hurdle had only strengthened his resolve. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with the energy of a full house, Marcus stepped outside for a moment to take it all in. The soft glow of the sign above the door illuminated the sidewalk, and he could hear the hum of laughter and conversation spilling out into the night. It was a stark contrast to the first time he'd walked through those doors, met with hostility and doubt. Back then, it had been easy to wonder if he'd made a mistake, if his vision was too ambitious, or if he was destined to fail. But now, standing there with the restaurant thriving behind him, he knew he had made the right choice. As he stood there, Olivia stepped outside to take a quick break, a smile lighting up her face when she saw him. "You look deep in thought," she said, leaning against the wall beside him. "Just reflecting," Marcus replied. "It's been quite the journey." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's hard to believe how much has changed," she said. "I think we all doubted you at first, but you proved us wrong." Marcus smiled, grateful for her honesty. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "This place is what it is because of all of you. I just gave it a push in the right direction." Olivia glanced back toward the restaurant, her smile widening as she watched the staff moving seamlessly through the dining room. "It feels good to be proud of where you work," she said softly. Marcus couldn't have agreed more. In the months that followed, the restaurant's success continued to grow. Awards and recognition began to roll in, not just for the food, but for the atmosphere and service as well. The team's hard work and dedication were finally paying off, and the once doubtful regulars now raved about the changes. Even Roland, who had been so resistant at the start, found himself in the spotlight. His revitalized creativity and passion earned him accolades, and he embraced the recognition with a humility that spoke volumes about his growth. For Marcus, the journey wasn't just about the restaurant. It was about what the experience represented, the power of perseverance, the importance of collaboration, and the potential for transformation when people come together with a shared purpose. As the restaurant continued to thrive, Marcus knew he'd achieved something truly special, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. And as he stood in the dining room one evening, watching the team work together with effortless synergy, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was more than a restaurant. It was a testament to what was possible when people dared to believe in something greater than themselves. It was a story of resilience, growth, and hope, a story that, in its own way, had just begun.